Reading through the Bible in 1 year, January 17th, Genesis 18, Matthew 17, Nehemiah 7, and Acts chapter 17. The Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them, bowed to the ground, and said, "My Lord, if I have found favor with you, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, that you may wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring a bit of bread so that you may strengthen yourselves. This is why you have passed your servant's way. Later you can continue on." "Yes," they replied, "do as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, knead 3 measures of fine flour and make bread." Abraham ran to the herd and got a tender, choice calf, and he gave it to a young man who hurried to prepare it. Then Abraham took curds and milk, as well as the calf that he had prepared, and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the tree. "Where is your wife, Sarah?" they asked him. "There, in the tent," he answered. The Lord said, "I will certainly come back to you in about a year's time, and your wife, Sarah, will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old and getting on in years. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. She was almost 90 years old. So she laughed to herself. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I have delight?" But the Lord asked Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, 'Can I really have a baby when I'm old?' Is anything impossible for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will come back to you, and in about a year she will have a son." But Sarah denied it. I did not laugh," she said, because she was afraid. But he replied, "No, you did laugh." The men got up from there and looked out over Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to see them off. Then the Lord said, "Should I hide what I'm about to do from Abraham? And Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just." Here we go, making sure we don't lose any notes. This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is immense, and their sin is extremely serious. I will go down to see if what they have done justifies the cry that comes to me. If not, I will find out." The men turned from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham stepped forward and said, Will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away instead of sparing the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people who are in it?" That's because Abraham knows how bad the city really is. He's trying to help the people who are there. You could not possibly do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. You could not possibly do that. Won't the judge of the whole earth do what is just? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham answered, since I have ventured to speak to my Lord, even though I am but dust and ashes." Then Abraham answered, "I read my spot wrong. Okay, there we go. Suppose that the 50 righteous lack 5. Will you destroy the whole city for a lack of 5? He responded, "No, I will not destroy if I find excuse me, 45 there." And he answered, "I will not do it." So Abraham spoke again and said, "Well, what if there's 40? He answered, "I will not do it on account of 40. Then he said, let my Lord not be angry. And I will speak further. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Then he said, Since I have ventured to speak to my Lord, suppose 20 are found there. He replied, I will not destroy it on account of 20. Then he said, Let my Lord not be angry. And I will speak one more time. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, I will not destroy it on account of 10. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place, probably thinking there's got to be at least 10 people there, 10 righteous people. Right? That's what he's hoping. All right, let's move on to Matthew chapter 17. After 6 days, now, quick note here. I'm not going to go into it this time, but in the future, I will go over this. Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he mentions that the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will reward each according to what he has done, right? And then he finishes that section by saying, Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And there's a lot of confusion on this and a lot of questions, right? I personally, I'm not going to go into too much detail this time. I'll do that next time. But I personally believe that Jesus is talking about now. And now it doesn't hit all the possible points. But he is saying that, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. 6 days later, this next thing happens, right? And there might have been someone in their party who died. We don't know. Or it could have been referring to something else, or a lot of other things that it could have possibly been referring to. But this one section itself, for me, makes the most sense, especially given where it is in the text, not just here, but in all of the other synoptic gospels where we see it mentioned. It happens exactly the same way. Jesus makes that statement, and then 6 days later, this thing happens. So after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and his brother John, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured in front of them. And his face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as the light. And suddenly Moses, representing the law, and Elijah, representing the prophets, appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter, who said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you want, I will set up 3 shelters, 3 tabernacles, 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And a voice came from the cloud and said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down and were terrified. And Jesus came up and touched them and said, Get up, do not be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus alone. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Don't tell anyone about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. So the disciples asked him, Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must first come? Well, Elijah is coming and will restore everything, he replied. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they didn't recognize him. On the contrary, they did whatever they pleased to him. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. When they reached the crowd, a man approached and knelt down before him. Lord, he said, have mercy on my son, because he has seizures and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him. Jesus replied, You unbelieving and perverse generation. How long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him here to me. Then Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him. And from that moment, the boy was healed. Then the disciples approached Jesus privately and asked, Why couldn't we drive it out? Because of your little faith, he replied. For truly I tell you, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you will tell this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Again, you're going to see that same term happen quite a bit, telling a mountain to be thrown into the sea, for instance. Um, that is a common Jewish idiom at the time for something that was impossible. In the same way that, I mean, I live in Colorado, I have giant mountains at my doorstep. It's impossible for me to imagine one of these giant things that weigh beyond the ability for us to measure how heavy that mountain itself would be, to take that thing and to throw it into the sea, or even the devastation that would cause. And yet that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying that even the most impossible thing for you will be possible if you have faith. This isn't a health and wealth thing. This is just saying that that's how we that's how it takes effect. And as they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus told them, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And on the third day, he'll be raised up. And they were deeply distressed. Again, as I said before, Jesus will continually tell them that he is going to suffer and die. Why? Because he tells them ahead of time so that when it happens, A, they're not shocked by it, and B, they're going to recognize the fact that he is a true prophet. Because a true prophet, when he says something is going to happen, it takes place. There we go. And that's all in notes. Oh, wait, no, I'm not done yet. Okay. When they came to Capernaum, those who collected the temple tax approached Peter and said, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" Now, this is just, okay. I've heard people say that what he's doing here is, well, they sent people to try to trick him. No, that happens later. What's happening here is simply that there are some people who normally collect the tax, and then they're just going, whoa, hold on, he didn't pay it. So Peter replies, yes, and he went into the house, and Jesus spoke first to him. "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the earthly kings collect tariffs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers?" "From strangers," he said. "Then the sons are free." Again, that's Jesus, always at that spiritual level, teaching them the whole time. "But, so we don't offend them, go to the sea, cast in a fish hook, and take the first fish that you catch. When you open its mouth, you'll find a coin. Take it and give it to them for me and you." Let's move on to Nehemiah chapter 7 now. When the wall had been rebuilt, I had the doors installed. The gatekeepers, singers, and Levites were appointed. Then I put my brother Hanani in charge of Jerusalem, along with Hananiah, commander of the fortress, because he was a faithful man who feared God more than most. And I said to them, "Do not open the gates of Jerusalem until the sun is hot, and let the doors be shut and securely fastened while the guards are on duty. Station the citizens of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some in their homes." The city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and no houses had yet been rebuilt. Then my God put into my mind to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the people to be registered by genealogy. I found the genealogical record of those who came back at the first, and I found the following written in it. These are the people of the province who went up among the captive exiles deported by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Each of them returned to Jerusalem and Judah to his own town. They came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Rehemiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mizpereth, Bigvai, Nahum, and Baanah. The number of the Israelite men included Parosh's descendants, 2,172, Shephatiah's descendants, 372, Era's descendants, 652, Pahath Moab's descendants, Jeshua's and Joab's descendants, 2,818. Elam's descendants, 1,254. Zatu's descendants, 845. Zakkai's descendants, 760. Binui's descendants, 648. Bebai's descendants, 628. Asgad's descendants, 2,322. Adonikam's descendants, 667. Bigvai's descendants, 2,067. Adin's descendants, 655. Otter's descendants of Hezekiah, 98. Hashum's descendants, 328. Bezai's descendants, 324. Harif's descendants, 112. Gibeon's descendants, 95. Bethlehem's and Netophah's men, 188. Anathoth's men, 128. Beth Asmaveth's men, 42. Kiriath Jearim, Kephra, and Beeroth's men, 743. Ramah and Geba's men, 621. Michmash's men, 122. Bethel and Ai or Ai's men, 123. The other Nebo's men, 52. The other Elam's people, 1,254. Harim's people, 320. Jericho's people, 345. Lod, Hadid, and Ono's people, 721. Sanaa's people, 3,930. The priests included Jedaiah's descendants of the house of Jeshua, 973, Immer's descendants, 1,052, Pashur's descendants, 1,247, Harim's descendants, 1,017. The Levites included Jeshua's descendants of Kadmiel, Hodeva's descendants, 74. The singers included Asaph's descendants, 148. The gatekeepers included Shallum's descendants, Atur's descendants, Talmon's descendants, Akub's descendants, Hatita's descendants, and Shobai's descendants, 138. This is a long one. The temple servants included Ziha's descendants, Hasufa's descendants, Tebaoth's descendants, Keros's descendants, Sia's descendants, or Sia's descendants, Pedon's descendants, Lebanon's descendants, Hagabah's descendants, Shalmai's descendants, Hanan's descendants, Gidel's descendants, Gahar's descendants, Reiah's descendants, Rezin's descendants, Nekoda's descendants, Gazam's descendants, Uzzah's descendants, Paseah's descendants, Besai's descendants, Meunim's descendants, Nephishim's, descendants, Bakbuk's descendants, I love that one, Hakufa's descendants, Harhur's descendants, Bazlith's descendants, Mahida's descendants, Harsha's descendants, Barkos's descendants, Sisera's descendants, Temah's descendants, Neziah's descendants, Hatifa's descendants. The descendants of Solomon's servants included Sotai's descendants, Sophereth's descendants, Perida's descendants, or Perida's descendants, Jaelah's descendants, Darkon's descendants, Gidel's descendants, Shephatiah's descendants, Hatitel's descendants, Pokrath Hazabaim's descendants, Amon's descendants. All the temple servants and the descendants of Solomon's servants, 392. The following are those who came from Tel Melah, Tel Harsha, Kerub, Adon, and Immer, but were unable to prove their ancestral families, and their lineage were Israelite. Delaiah's descendants, Tobiah's descendants, and Nekoda's descendants, 642. And from the priests, the descendants of Hobaiah, the descendants of Hakaz, then the descendants of Barzillai, who had taken a wife from the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite, and who bore their name. These searched for their entries in the genealogical record. Bringing up the rest of the notes here because you're going to skip those. There we go. These searched for their entries in the genealogical records, but they could not be found, so they were disqualified from the priesthood. The governor ordered them not to eat the most holy things until there was a priest who could consult the Urim and the Thummim. We'll get to those later. The whole combined assembly numbered 42,360, not including their 7,337 male and female servants, as well as their 245 male and female singers. They had 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, 6,720 donkeys. Some of the family heads contributed to the project. The governor gave 1,000 gold coins, 50 bowls, and 530 priestly garments to the treasury. Some of the family heads gave 20,000 gold coins and 2,200 silver minas to the treasury for the project. The rest of the people gave 20,000 gold coins and 2,000 silver minas and 67 priestly garments. The priests, Levites, gatekeepers, temple singers, and some of the people, temple servants, and all Israel settled in their towns. Now, tomorrow, this next chapter actually begins in this next line. So I'm going to read it now, but tomorrow we'll get through the whole thing together. So I'll roll back and reread this line. Just know that when the verse and chapter divisions were put in, this came far afterward, and sometimes we get little slip-ups like this. It's fine. It doesn't hurt anything. But it's just something neat to know when we read the text. So when the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, we'll hear about that tomorrow. Let's go into Acts chapter 17, probably one of my very favorite chapters in the entire Bible. Now, briefly, if you've never read a systematic theology book, I don't know why not. They're great fun to read. But the section we're going to go through here at the end reads exactly like you would find normally in a systematic theology text, where if you think about it, if you're talking to somebody who knows nothing about Jesus, who knows nothing about God, a true atheist who hasn't grown up with any kind of a Judeo-Christian mindset or hasn't learned anything about it, the person on the street who you may talk to, who you mention the name Jesus and they've never heard of him, right? If you can imagine such a person, these people existed in that time. And mostly it was in the furthest out regions. They had other gods they would talk about and other gods that they would discuss, which we're going to see here shortly. But in order for Paul to describe to them this God, he starts off at the very basest things and then works his way through to explain who this God is. Let's get there. So after they passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, there we go. They came to Thessalonica, where there was a Jewish synagogue. And as usual, Paul went into the synagogue and on 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and raise from the dead. This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Messiah. Some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, including a large number of God-fearing Greeks, as well as a number of the leading women. But the Jews became jealous. This is a recurring theme. We're going to see a lot of that. And they brought together some wicked men from the marketplace, and they formed a mob and started a riot in the city. And attacking Jason's house, they searched for them and to bring them out to the public assembly. When they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here too. And Jason has welcomed them. They are all acting contrary to Caesar's decrees, saying there is another king, Jesus." The crowd and city officials who heard these things were upset. After taking a security bond from Jason and the others, they released them. As soon as it was night, the brothers and sisters sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. Upon arrival, they went into the synagogue of the Jews, again, as was their custom. The people here, however, were more noble in character than those in Thessalonica, since they received the word with eagerness and examined the scriptures daily to see if these things, those being said by Paul, were so. Consequently, many of them believed, including a number of the prominent Greek women as well as men. But when the Jews from Thessalonica, I guess this is a roving band now, they chased them around, found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul at Berea also, they came there too, agitating and upsetting the crowds. Then The brothers and sisters immediately sent Paul away to the coast, but Silas and Timothy stayed on there so that Paul could get away. And those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens. And after receiving instructions for Silas and Timothy, to come to him as quickly as possible, they departed. Now, we have here a pastor, a church planter, and a theologian who's bored. He's sitting in a city, in a great city of Greece. He's in Athens, right? And what does he do? Well, he goes out and sees the town. He's waiting for his brothers to arrive. And while he was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed when he saw that the city was full of idols. The term full of in this case is the same thing as we read before when people were talked about as being full of the Holy Spirit. It means overflowing with the Holy Spirit, or in this case, the city itself was overflowing with various idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with those who worship God, as well as in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also debated with him. Now, this is interesting because it shows the two ranges of the philosophers at the time. You had the Epicureans who believed that it was right and proper to partake of everything in the world, to eat your fill and enjoy yourself in everything you possibly could, in order to find happiness. Also, you had these Stoics. Many Stoic philosophers abandoned everything, jobs, what have you, so that they could have literally nothing to their name. They lived on the well wishes and gifts from their own followers in order to even be able to eat. So that's the two ranges of philosophies, which were, again, the most popular philosophies at the time. And he was debating with some of these people as well. And some of them said, "What is this ignorant show-off trying to say?" They called him a babbler. Why? Because he was speaking a language that a lot of them didn't understand. Others replied, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign deities," because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Well, they took him and brought him up to the Areopagus, which is a place that people would typically go to have these kind of open discussions. It was a forum of sorts where you could engage in these deep discussions about such things. I lost my spot. Yep, there we go. And said, "May we learn about this new teaching that you are presenting? Because what you say sounds strange to us, and we want to know what these things mean." Now, all the Athenians and foreigners residing there spent their time on nothing else but telling or hearing something new. So, right here's where it begins. And we're going to see him go through, as I mentioned before, probably one of my favorite defenses and explanations of the way that, what's a good way to put this? Of the way to describe God to somebody. And he goes through very simple statements. And I'm positive that this is not everything he said, but it's a shorter list that's been kind of whittled down so that we can see roughly the things that were said. In the same way that Jesus, when he was giving speeches or discussions with people, they would say, "He started to say," and then it gives us a kind of a snapshot of what that is. And the same thing here, we get to see some of what he was saying. Let's see what it is. So Paul stood in the middle of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that you are extremely religious in every respect." Again, a little bit of sarcasm. They have idols everywhere. "For I was passing through and observing the objects of your worship, and I even found an altar on which was inscribed, 'To an unknown God.'" Why would they have one to an unknown God? Because they wanted to be certain that they didn't miss a God when they were putting these things out there. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this, the God you have missed, I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it. Again, remember, a lot of the things that they would worship at that time were regional gods. This is a god of Greece, or this is the god of the hills in the north of Greece, or this is the god of the valleys, or perhaps the god of the seas, or the god of all of these other little things. There wasn't one specific god that was the all-encompassing God of all things. And this is who our God is. He is the grand creator, the one who spoke and the entire universe leapt into existence. And as the creator of all things, as the former of all things, he is the one who sets the rules for everything that exists. Everything is responsible to do as he has said. This is the God that he's speaking of. So that's the first thing we see. He is this creator God. Not just is he the creator God, but he is the Lord, the king, the ruler of heaven and earth. And he does not live in shrines made by hands, because they see their shrines everywhere. Neither is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives everyone life and breath and all things. Now, this gives us more information about this God, doesn't it? He's a God who has the ability to take care of the needs of his individual creations. Even the birds of the air and the fish and everything else, as well as us human beings, God is the one who makes sure that we have what we need. See how this works? And that's what he's describing to them. From one man, he has made every nationality to live over the whole earth, and has determined their appointed times and boundaries of where they live. This is how much God cares about his creation. He created all nations and created all of their borders. He created the nations themselves and the people to serve underneath him. So even whereas we may be worshiping, or not worshiping, but serving our nation, that doesn't change anything for the fact that we still have the same God who serves, rather whom we serve through serving these other nations. He did this so that they might seek God. That is the reason why God has created all of these other nations, so that they might seek God together. And perhaps they might reach out and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. For we are also his offspring. Since, then, we are God's offspring, we shouldn't think that the divine nature is something like silver or gold or stone, an image fashioned by human art and imagination. So we can't even imagine what God might be like, because he's so far outside of who we are. Therefore, having understood that you previously had worshipped your little idols that you've been creating, he's overlooked that time of ignorance. But now that you know the truth, God now commands all people everywhere to repent, to turn from those things, because he has set a day in which he is going to judge the world in righteousness by the man he has appointed. He has provided proof of this to everyone by raising this man from the dead. Well, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to ridicule him. But others said, We'd like to hear more about this. So Paul left their presence. However, some of the people joined him and believed him, including Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. And that is all of the notes. All right, that's all for today. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Behold, the word of the Lord.